If you invested $10,000 in AMD stock in 2013, you would have $363,000 today. That's an incredible 3,530% return in that time. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how AMD got there, and as a bonus, I'm going to highlight if investors today can expect something similar in the future, or in other words, is it too late to invest in AMD stock? So let's get right into the details of how AMD delivered incredible investment results for investors in the last decade. And one thing to look at here is the revenue growth from 2013 onward. You could see very robust revenue growth from AMD, reaching the double digits in several quarters and over 40%, over 80% during the pandemic, and 16% most recently quarter over quarter. Over the last decade, the main thing with AMD has been it is taking market share. So AMD's CPU chips have been taking market share from Intel, and then AMD's GPUs have been taking market share from Nvidia. Nvidia still dominates, but they used to dominate more completely that GPU market. There used to be few other options, but now AMD is a viable option for those gamers that are looking for a GPU, or those companies and enterprises that are holding servers that want to build servers with GPUs and CPUs. AMD is a viable option now, and they have been for the last decade, and they will continue to be over the next decade, even if they're not absolutely the best in terms of cutting edge technology. Even if Nvidia is ahead, that doesn't mean Nvidia is going to capture 100% of the market. AMD is doing a good job siphoning off a good share of the market for itself, and that's delivered incredible returns for AMD stock investors over the last decade. Another thing AMD has done incredibly well is use that increase in revenue growth to boost profitability. You look at profits, here's the zero line here. The company was losing money for several years as it ramped up production and increased scale, and then starting 2018 really made exponential improvements in profitability. If you look at 2013, the company lost almost $1 billion in net income trailing 12 months. And you look at this growth, it made 1.32 billion in net income in the trailing 12 months, all the while making nice progress upward. If we ignore the fluctuations, we can draw a line from the beginning to the end here that shows a nice steady upward trajectory in terms of net profitability over the last decade, and that's ultimately the name of the game. The thing that influences stock price meaningfully, very meaningfully, is the rise in profits, is the rise in earnings per share. If you map out stock price returns with earnings per share, they have a very strong correlation. So as earnings per share increases, that typically causes an increase in the stock prices. As an oversimplification, without trying to complicate things too much, you could think about stock price growth being very closely connected to earnings per share growth in the long run, and that's what AMD has delivered to investors in the last decade. All right, so now we understand why AMD's stock price has increased so much in the last decade, but can it do something similar over the next decade? Well, to answer that question, I first want to look at AMD's valuation, and looking at its price to earnings forward ratio at 32.03, the stock is not prohibitively expensive, meaning it's not way overpriced. It's not cheap at a forward PE of 32, but it's also not very, very expensive, right? If you look at its competitor AMD, its forward price to earnings ratio is well above the 40s. So AMD is a little bit less expensive than Nvidia, and they are both going to benefit from the secular growth in the demand for their products, right? GPUs and CPUs are going to continue growing in demand. Consumers, whether it be enterprises or end users, regular everyday users, they're going to demand more and more CPUs and GPUs as more and more of the products that we use, the electronics that we use, are going to require these for increased performance. So they're going to benefit from this growing industry. So will you get a similar return over the next decade? I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now. I don't think so. I don't think you're going to get, what was it, 3,500% return on your investment in AMD stock over the next decade. But that's okay. You don't need to get that much, right? You would be happy with a, rate of return that's like, 100% over the next decade or 200% over the next decade. Doesn't have to be 3,000%. And when it comes down to it, I can reasonably say that if you buy AMD stock today, it's likely going to increase your wealth over the next decade. Now, I say likely, that's the key word there. It's not certain to increase your wealth in the next decade. It's not certain that the price is going to increase over the next decade. But, according to my research, according to my estimates, I would say that you would be reasonable to expect that it is going to increase, right? It's a reasonable expectation. It's not an absolute certainty, but it is a reasonable expectation given all of the factors around AMD, the products that it sells, the industry that it's in, and the competition that it faces. All right, so that's all I've got for this video. As always, I truly appreciate your viewership, and I've hand-selected a few videos that are popping up on your screens right now. I think you're going to enjoy those, so click on one of those, and I'll see you over there. I don't think so.